Welcome. It is so lovely to see you all, and thank you for coming, braving the weather, and I hope you have a good time. It's so good to see you all, everybody, and people from near and people from far, and some we see very regularly and some we don't see very often at all. But you are all very welcome. Thank you for coming. It's good to hear from so many family and friends from the past and from the present. Now, I've known Trevor probably since we were in our prams, and it may even have been before then, because we met at Northumberland Heath Baptist Church, and we went round there from very small, and we went to the Sunday school, Boys Brigade, Girls Life Brigade, Youth Group, Christian Endeavour. So that's over 80 years. And what do you say after all this time? We were married in 1957, and we have 3 wonderful children. They and everybody has been so supportive. We've got 10 grandchildren. I don't think they all made it today. 11 great-grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. Thank you to those who will be sharing some of their memories. That is very good of you to do that for us this afternoon. Trevor died so peacefully. He was at home, no problems, just faded away, and I was with him when he took his last breath on the 30th of December. God is so good, and I give him thanks for all the memories that I have of Trevor, and that all of us have, and that he's left here for us. Thank you to everyone for your love and support. And most of the service will run smoothly as you've got it in your order of service. Thank you very much for coming, and bless you.
And so we join together in prayer. God, be in my head and in my understanding. God, be in my eyes and in my looking. God, be in my mouth and in my speaking. God, be in my heart and in my thinking. God, be at my end and at my departing. Almighty God, we thank you that we can gather and give thanks this afternoon for the life of Trevor Frank King. Give us the courage to rejoice in a life well lived. Comfort those who mourn. And may our remembering bring you honour for the precious gift of life that has blessed others in Trevor. Amen. As we begin, we're going to take the words of the 23rd Psalm that remind us that God is our good shepherd, who loves us with loving kindness, watches over us all the days of our life. Generally, we stand to sing so we can get a right good lungful of air. So feel free to stand and join us in celebrating the goodness of God to us. Please do be seated as we join together in prayer, saying the words of the Lord's Prayer, which will appear on the screen, but is also in your orders of service. We say together, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. As Stella said, the service will proceed unannounced, and thank you, Elizabeth, for coming up so promptly. There is just one change. Unfortunately, Rita and Joe haven't been able to make it. I think that's right. And Daniel, Stella's grandson, is going to be contributing. Great! So you know when you're going.
There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. He has made everything beautiful in his time.
Hi, I'm Daniel, Trevor's grandson. I've been asked to read this on behalf of my great aunt Rita, who couldn't be here because of the unpredictable weather. For anyone who doesn't know Rita, she's Trevor's younger sister. I would like to tell you a little about the brother I had when I was growing up. Trevor was always loving, considerate, protective, and also a shocking tease to his little sister. He thought I was going to be called Jennifer. Rita had planned to bring the letter that he wrote to their mum at their birth. Trevor could do anything. I remember him sitting at our mum's sewing machine and making some doll's clothes. He could knit, especially scarves. He could cook. I believe I was the first person to try curried baked beans. Trevor simply added curry powder to an ordinary tin of baked beans. If only he had patented that idea. I was about 7 years old at the time. Trevor was always teasing my friends and me. We used to keep rabbits, and I remember that at our home he had filled Ron's sister Gillian's pockets with some baby rabbits that had recently been born. Gillian didn't realise she had them until she'd nearly reached her home. No rabbits were damaged by this incident, in case you're worried. Trevor excelled at maths, geography and history. He used to draw maps, and he did 2 perfectly fine ones of Kent, using our dining room table as his easel, and often with our cat Robbie perching on his shoulders. The details were shown in red, green and blue ink. One was given to Erith Grammar School and another to Erith Library. Trevor must have enjoyed the human sciences because he became a nurse in the Royal Air Force when he did his national service. I can still remember his number, 2748412. He later joined the St John Ambulance Brigade, working alongside his father-in-law, Mr Weeble. Trevor also loved cross-country running, and I used to accompany him on my bike as we chatted along together. He was also a keen cyclist and would often cycle from Northumberland Heath to Old Coulsdon to see Auntie Olive, a friend of the family. He always seemed to have a nosebleed before he went to see her, very strange. Trevor was in the Boys Brigade, the 18th West Kent Company, for several years and later attended many of the reunions. He also had a paper round and would share his tips with me as my pocket money. He would also save much of his earnings so that he could buy presents for each of us at birthdays and Christmas. Trevor took 2 civil service exams, at least one, I believe, before he went into the RAF. He came top in the country in one and 5th in the other. I wasn't always a good sister and would get him into trouble with our mum by comparing his untidy shelf in the dining room with all his fossils to mine, which was always in pristine condition. On one occasion, when we both had chicken pox, I gloated that I had only picked one spot, not like him who was covered in spots and had picked quite a few. He always forgave me, however, and we were always the best of friends. Trevor took me to London by train a number of times. We visited mainly art galleries, as he was very good at sketching as well as drawing. Some of his handiwork can be seen on the letters he wrote whilst in Nepal and a card that he sent to our grandma, which I had planned to bring here today. Trevor didn't suffer fools gladly, and the game of Trivial Pursuit was not trivial to him at all. Yet we had such fun trying to wind him up by making wild and outrageous guesses at some of the answers. Trevor found this particularly upsetting when our answers turned out to be right. When Stella joined our family, I had the sister I always wanted. Then along came Stephen, Andrew and Denise, more family for me to love. Now our family has grown even larger, with Trevor and Stella's children's partners and grandchildren, great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. Trevor was a good support to Joe and I, to our children, John and Anne, and all our extended family. We might not always have agreed with him, but our love for each other always shone through. We thank God for Trevor and all the gifts he had, and we will miss him greatly.
These are some reflections from Brian Oman. He writes, Trevor was my best friend when we were boys and young people together and belonged to Northumberland Heath Baptist Church at Erith. Our parents belonged to the church and were good friends, and my father was church secretary. And we were in the Life Boys, the Boys Brigade, the Christian Endeavour, as well as meeting in each other's homes, and we enjoyed cycling together. Trevor was good at organising what he called a ramble for Bank Holiday Mondays, when a group of us young people would enjoy a walk well planned by Trevor. But it rained sometimes. In 1953, when I was 18, and just before I did my national service in the RAF, we caught the 3:25 a.m. train to London and made our way to Oxford Street, where we secured a place in the second row for the royal wedding. It rained, but I took some pictures as the Queen and Prince Philip went past. But someone just in front put up their hand to wave at the wrong time, so part of her was in the picture. It was a special memory I shared with Trevor, to which we referred not so long ago. I was Trevor's best man when he married Stella, and Trevor was my best man when I married Barbara some years. Sorry, that's me. I used to say that Trevor got in with computers early and secured a very well-paid job, and I respected and admired the way in which he gave up that work to work with the Baptist Missionary Society in their headquarters in London, dealing with their computers before he and Stella were called to go to Nepal as missionaries. During my time in the RAF, I was called to the ministry, and after working in the city for 2 years, applied to Spurgeon's College with a challenge of obtaining 2 A-levels in the first year, as well as preparing for an intermediate BD. I did not pass the finals, but it did not prevent me from being ordained in 1962, a year after I married Barbara. I remember being so proud when Trevor and Stella came on deputation with the BMS while on furlough in England and visited my and other local Baptist churches for the weekend. I admired and respected the way in which they changed to a more frugal kind of living after their experiences in Nepal. He writes, the last time I actually saw Trevor and Stella was when they came to my end of ministry Thanksgiving service at Exmouth Baptist Church after 23 years there and a total of 36 years in the Christian ministry. It's a long time. Barbara and I then retired to live in Swanage, where we still live. And I thank the Lord for every memory I have of Trevor and his friendship over so many years.
Remember by Christina Rossetti. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I, half turned to go, yet turning, stay. Remember me when no more, day by day, you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me. You understand it will be late to counsel then, or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thought that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile, than that you should remember and be sad.
I'm Ron Westcott. I'm a friend of Trevor's. I'm trying not to go over the same ground as Rita and Brian, but I've no danger of going over the same ground as Rita because I met Trevor when we were both 4 years old, which is about 4 years before Rita arrived. Our back garden gates were about 40 yards apart, so we could have a conversation without leaving our back gardens. And we had tricycles. We used to ride up and down the back alleys all over the place, much further than we told our parents that we were going. And we had a game where we pretended to be trains, and all the back garden gates we gave station names to. And it sounds all silly now, doesn't it? But at the time, when we were 5 and 6, we took it very seriously indeed. And if we missed out a station, we had to go back and pick up the passengers that we'd left behind. It was all very serious. Now, we went to the same junior school together, but I didn't see Trevor for quite a long time because we were evacuated. This was wartime, and they sent us to the north of England. Trevor went to Cheshire, where there were supposed to be fewer bombs, and the doodlebugs couldn't reach. When When he came back after a year or so, he'd picked up a few words of Cheshire dialect, which stayed in his vocabulary for quite some years. It was when we were 9 that Trevor persuaded me to leave the boy Cubs, where I'd been messing around for a couple of years, and join the Life Boys. Now, this was a very considerable step, I came to realise later on, because the Life Boys led on to Boys Brigade, and the Boys Brigade led me into church, and possibly altered the whole direction of my life, certainly. Then we went to grammar school together, and we were in the same class for 7 years, and we got to know each other really well. He was very, very good at history and geography, but he wasn't quite so hot at some of the things that he wasn't interested in. And he won't mind me telling you about this, because he raised the subject quite often in subsequent discussions. But there was a new English literature master who Trevor didn't like very much. And this master used to get fed up with all of us because we couldn't apparently remember lots and lots of verses of poetry, which he said he could. It all came to a head one day when we were looking at Gray's Eulogy, which is a wonderful poem, but it has 30-odd verses. And he asked, how many verses do you think you could learn? And somebody put their hands up and said 5. So he said, all right, how many of you can learn 5 verses? And half the class put their hands up. And there was a hint of derision in his voice when he said, how many can only learn 4 verses? And the other half of the class put their hands up. All except Trevor, who kept his hands firmly below the desk, obviously hoping that the master wouldn't have seen him. But he had. He said, all right, King, how many do you think you could learn? And we all waited. You're going to say 6 or 8 or something silly like that. 2, he said. And we all had a laugh, but the master was absolutely livid. And from that day on, for the next year, while we had poetry classes, and he used to set these things for homework. It's a funny sort of homework. Learn so many verses of this poem. He'd come in and he'd throw his books on the desk and say, right, King, stand up. Let's have your 2 verses. And woe betide if you got a word wrong. He didn't, of course. He could learn 2 verses. He could learn 4 or 5 like the rest of us. But he didn't consider that learning large chunks of poetry was an essential element of his education. He was very good at the things that he wanted to be good at. The other thing that he was good at school was running, which is a bit of a surprise, really, because he wasn't an obvious athlete. He found he could run longer distances. He wasn't a sprinter. He found he could run the mile rather better than most of the rest of the school. And he won the school mile in 1954. Now, the mile was very topical in 1954 because all the newspapers were full of athletes all over the world trying to run a 4-minute mile, and a lot of them thought it was impossible. And the evening when Roger Bannister ran the first 4-minute mile, Trevor and I had a little celebration across our back gardens after this event. Trevor's mile took a fraction longer than Roger's, but nevertheless it was faster than anybody else in the school. And his tactic was a simple one, if you could call it a tactic. He started at a reasonable pace and just carried on. No spurts or relaxation bits. He just carried on the same old pace all the way through. And he translated this into the cross-country races that Rita had referred to in her memo. To most of us, cross-country was a form of torture inflicted on us by this rather sadistic games master that we had, who insisted that everybody ran, no matter what sort of state they were in, what sort of condition they were in, everybody had to run. He said it was a good course. It was in Lesnes Abbey Woods. There were very steep hills up and down and big tree roots across all the paths. It was difficult to walk along, let alone run. And at this time of the year particularly, there was ample doses of mud everywhere. And Trevor used exactly the same tactic. He'd set off at an average pace and just carry on, regardless of what lay before him. And this ability to carry on despite the things that were thrown in his way was to surface a lot later on in his life. After school, there came national service, as Brian referred to. There seemed to be an unwritten rule amongst national servicemen that you didn't volunteer for anything. But Trevor did. He volunteered to be a medical orderly. All the glamour jobs in the RAF were reserved for the professionals. But the mundane jobs you could volunteer for, and Trevor did. And it was not wartime anymore. There were no war injuries, thankfully. But people still found ways of getting themselves injured, playing with heavy machinery and artillery. Ammunition was a good way of getting yourself injured. And Trevor was there with other people to help these people along the way. While he was there, he volunteered for something else as well. The government were getting very anxious at the time about all the time lost for people taking work off because of the common cold. And they said they were carrying on these experiments down at Porton Down in Wiltshire to find a cure for the common cold. Trevor volunteered again. He volunteered for this. And he went down to Porton Down and he was injected with a few different things and took a few pills and that kind of thing, and came back and carried on his normal duties. It wasn't until about 30 or 40 years later, long time later, that the MOD decided they had to tell the truth about these injections. They were nothing to do with the common cold at all. They were the first forays into the field of biological warfare, germ warfare, things that we've been hearing a lot about in the last few years. Trevor, fortunately, wasn't injured or harmed in any way, but he was pleased to receive a token amount of compensation from the government just for volunteering. You've seen up here Trevor in his RAF uniform, and I couldn't help thinking that he was one of the few, not one of Winston Churchill's few, but one of the few people that did anything useful during his national service. After the RAF, Trevor went into the stationery office and learned about computers, as you've heard from Brian. He became very, very good at programming these things. I remember him giving a talk at our men's meeting at the Baptist Church about computers, and nobody had the foggiest idea what he was talking about. We didn't have computers in the house, not for many years after that. He was talking about computers which were sort of half the size of this building. And it soon became clear that other people outside the civil service were able and willing to pay very much more than the government was prepared to pay to people who had knowledge of computers and that kind of thing. And Trevor took advantage of this, and there followed a period of financial stability, shall we call it. He'd had his children very early on in his marriage, and he'd found out not only how fulfilling and how rewarding that was, but also how expensive. And now, for the first time, there were a few pennies left over, and he bought a car. Very difficult to cast your mind back to the early 1960s. There weren't all that many cars about. Trevor had one, and he very generously took Margaret and myself for a tour of Norfolk, which none of us had ever been to before. These were exciting days. You could go places, and Trevor took full advantage. Now, there's no way I can justify a friendship which lasted for 81 years in just a few minutes, and I'm not going to try. I'm going to press the fast forward button and go on to the time when Trevor and Stella volunteered their services to the Baptist Missionary Society, which Brian has already referred to. They went out to Nepal. And there they weren't able to, because of the regime out there, they weren't able to indulge in the sort of things that you and I would think of as missionary work, but they just helped people, impoverished and disadvantaged people, just to enjoy their lives better, just to get more out of the lives that they were leading. Back at home, after 4 years in Nepal, Trevor offered his services to the Metropolitan Police, again working with computers, trying to sort out some of their problems for them. Only some, because they've got a few left apparently. In his spare time, he went down here to Elleray Hall. I think you're going to hear something more about that later on. Again, it was just helping people to enjoy their lives better than they would have, setting quizzes and all that kind of thing. And then again, another 20 years or so went past and he had the first of his strokes. It was then that his ability just to carry on, which had shown itself in his early days, came to the fore again. He had holidays, he continued to have holidays. He went to Gloucester and Lichfield, places with an interesting history, and his knowledge of history helped him to enjoy these places more. And he still went, even in his wheelchair, he went down to Elleray Hall. He might have been physically disadvantaged, but mentally he was just the same. He and I had long conversations about all sorts of things. He dug up some photographs, old school photographs, and he wanted to talk about these people. He did talk. We talked for ages about these people that we hadn't even seen or heard of for 60 odd years. And we talked for an awful long time. Stella just sat there and listened patiently. We call her Saint Stella in our house. Just the amount of patience and love that she poured out in Trevor's direction all the time, especially, not only in the last few years, but especially so in these last few years. And it was clear to everybody after a while that there was only going to be one ending to this. And it was still something of a surprise because of Trevor's grit and determination. It was something, just a little hint of surprise when Stella phoned us on New Year's Eve and told us that Trevor had come to the end of the road. It had been a long road, 85 years. And on his way, Trevor had met and had influenced and had helped a very large number, a very wide range of people. We will all miss him.
Hello everybody, I'm Stephen and I'm Trevor and Stella's favourite. I'd like to begin by thanking everybody for their kind messages, cards and flowers. I know my mum really appreciated getting so many as well. My dad mentioned in his many jottings that this memorial service should be a happy occasion. I hope we can try and make it that his wish come true today. Dad was an incredible person. He always enjoyed meeting people and really listened to them. He was very interested in what others had to say. Whatever information he was given was stored for later use. He seemed to have an endless ability to learn and retain information and was so willing to share what he knew. A day trip with Dad was not only an enjoyable day, but also a history and geography lesson. Dad always enjoyed going on holiday. He also enjoyed preparing for the holiday. He liked planning, and whatever we were going to do each day, what places we were visiting, etc., etc. I sometimes wonder if he enjoyed the planning the holiday as much as the holiday itself. He probably did. His memory was amazing. He could remember not only the dates of every holiday he had ever been on, but also every place and every building. I also enjoyed Dad's Sunday lunches, which used to be cooking while we were attending church. It was not always a traditional roast. Sometimes we had hearts, breast of lamb, liver and bacon, and lots of other interesting things. He was a very good cook. Dad used to enjoy smoking a pipe, which some people may not realise, and Gold Block was one of his favourite tobaccos. He stopped smoking after having his stroke. Dad enjoyed making up quizzes for Christmas. On Christmas Day, we used to receive a satsuma, nuts and a small toy in our stocking on Christmas Day morning. But we had to wait to open our main presents until after Christmas dinner. Never before. When Dad was able, he used to make my mum coffee in bed every morning. A hard act to follow, I'm afraid. During his last 6 months, while I was caring for him, we would go to LRA Hall for the quiz one morning, and another morning we used to go to LRA Hall for the exercise to music. Enjoyed both of them, and he also enjoyed having an omelette for lunch. Probably the omelette for lunch was his favourite, yes. Dad used to enjoy making ginger beer when we were younger. We always enjoyed drinking it. It was very nice. We realised later that it may have been alcoholic, as Dad fermented the ginger with yeast. Dad was a teetotal, as was his parents. When we went to the LRA Hall Christmas dinner last December, Dad was offered a glass of wine, which he gladly accepted, surprisingly. He downed the glass of wine in one. I encouraged him to have a juice after that, as he was more used to drinking juice or squash. Mum and Dad's favourite daughter and my favourite sister, Denise, has asked me to read her memories of Dad. My dad was very good at cross-country running when he was younger. By training hard, he eventually won the school cross-country and managed to get in the second team for rugby. Dad was a conscientious objector. He worked as an RAF medic at Ely Hospital for a year, and then 6 months at Moulton in Marsh while doing national service. I think people could learn from his views and hopefully not go to war. So keen was Dad to get into the civil service that he took the clerical officer examination and came first in the country. When I was 4, my dad was helping my brother Stephen to cycle along a path. I was running behind them and fell over and knocked my 2 front teeth out. They were never found, so I might have swallowed them. Dad felt guilty about this for decades, and I said to him he shouldn't be guilty, and it was an accident. I don't remember feeling bad about losing my teeth, so I was without my front teeth for a number of years. Dad was not usually someone who showed his feelings a lot, but I know that he had deep feelings and felt a great amount. One of my first memories is of him crying when he stopped his car. I asked why, and he said because his dad had died recently. His dad died aged 56 years old from a heart problem. I helped Dad in the garden at 10 Gloucester Road, Teddington, which was our family home from 1966 to 1979. My dad used to grow dahlias, which were lovely, and he brought them indoors over the winter. Dad had a lot of fruit like blackberries, gooseberries and rhubarb. We often had crumbles with fruit from the garden. Dad went blackberry picking at Ham Common and came back with his legs badly scratched every time. Dad frequently made jams and marmalades, which I enjoyed. Dad also made Sunday roasts, and I remember many lovely meals. Dad voluntarily helped with the community care group, and as a teenager, I used to go with him to meet people at different locations, and people came to our home. Dad's hearing was not very good when I was young, and we used to talk about him sometimes when he was in the same room. I realise that's not right now. Suddenly, his bad ear worked okay after 50 years, and we had to stop talking about him when he was there. Dad tried to help to do my homework, which must have been quite hard for him at times, as I didn't know how to work things out, like maths. Dad used to bring a toasted hot cross bun to me in bed when it was Easter. How good was that? I didn't really appreciate it at the time. When Mum and Dad were living in Nepal, Kathmandu, Nepal, I visited them for a month in 1983. It was quite an experience, and there were beautiful views. The sights and sounds were very different to here. I went to a village at the top of a hill called Makai Singh without Mum and Dad. I also stayed with Mum in Pokhara, which had lovely views of the mountains. My mum took me to various places. My dad had just broken his leg in a motorbike accident prior to my visit, so mostly was unable to join us. Mum said maybe Dad would have worn me out. Dad said to me that he and other men like flowers, so why are they not usually on cards to men? I don't know the answer, but I think Dad was right. I remember Dad saying that pigeons have different coloured feathers and were quite pretty. And at that time, I didn't think much of them. But after I saw them but after that, I saw them more in his way. Later in life, my dad had his eyes operated on, and then he had no glasses. He had worn glasses from a young age, and I had always known him to wear them, so it was quite strange to see him without. He had better eyesight than me. Dad enjoyed geography and history. He taught himself a lot of the knowledge that he knew. I miss being able to ask him questions. Now we have to ask Google if I don't know. And it's not quite the same thing as asking Dad and getting his answer. Mum and Dad were in my pandemic bubble, and I'm thankful that they let me. I honestly don't know how I would have coped without them when I couldn't see my husband Colin as he lives in a care home. Thanks, Mum, for everything you've done for me at all times, and thanks to Dad if you're listening. Mum and I were with Dad when he passed away, and I have never had that experience before. My mum and I were both wearing masks as Mum and Dad were both coronavirus positive. Since Dad had passed away, something said, the late Trevor King. My response is, that he was not late in life, he was early. I miss Dad and wish I was able to see him again, which one day I hope I will in my dreams.
That was really nice, thank you. It's amazing what you learn about somebody that you never knew before, just from small memories. Some of the things that Rita said were really wonderful. I'm Andy, so I'm the middle child, and apparently I am Dad's second favourite, or maybe third. All right. For so many of us, it seems that the true character, personality, and abilities of our parents don't become clear until we are adults. And for me, this was very much the case. When we were growing up, I always thought that our dad was the smartest person in the room, or in the town, or maybe in the world. But in later years, I found out the real truth. He was. Well, that's somewhat of an exaggeration, but he was probably the most knowledgeable person I have known, except in the area of modern culture, in which he was woefully but willfully ignorant. Whenever a historical or geographical question arises, our first thought, even now, is to ask Google, Siri, and Alexa pale in comparison. But along with his enormous depth of knowledge, Dad was a thinker in a philosophical and political sense. He was outraged by injustice and committed to the equality of people. He was a pacifist, an advocate for an advocate for human rights, and he didn't consider anyone to be more important just because of their social status, religion, or gender. And this outlook on humanitarian social justice will live on through his influence on others. After returning from Nepal, Dad worked at the Citizens Advice Bureau, and I always considered this one of the practical outcomes of his desire to help others and to ensure that these less advantaged people would find more happiness in their lives. He was a closet Quaker and wished that all people could be equal. He was selfless and frugal and generous, and he cared about the world and what humankind is doing to it. In 1957, our dad serendipitously found what was to be his greatest joy in life, at least in my opinion. He was accepted for training in a new discipline, namely computer programming. This began a lifetime of working with computers of all sizes and software of myriad types, developing everything from an operating system for an early mainframe computer to an interactive database system for tracking police dogs. It is difficult to express the depth and breadth of skill that was required to know and do everything that Dad knew and did with computers. And his knowledge didn't stagnate. He was always learning and understanding new technologies. It was only his stroke a decade ago, that stopped him from continuing this enterprise for the rest of his life. Our dad was also a faultlessly honest and ethical person, but there were things which he hid from us, his children, to help us. It wasn't until I was in my 40s that I discovered his fear of heights. When Mum and Dad stayed with us in Arizona and we went hiking on a very steep path, he showed his fear. He also had a fear of drowning, which resulted from a childhood incident in which he nearly drowned. But his ability to keep these fears hidden, and perhaps other fears, that even now we are unaware of, has meant that I don't have these fears and that they haven't been passed on to later generations. When I think of our dad and what brought him joy in life, it brings to mind programming, holidays with our mum, solving crosswords and sudokus, playing spider solitaire and minesweeper, listening to the Archers in the 70s, the Goon Show, cricket, Charles Dickens, writing quizzes, reading about history, watching Morecambe and Wise, listening to Mozart, visiting new places, going to cathedrals and other historic sites, and eating ice cream. I may struggle here. I'm not actually very unhappy. I am so very saddened that I will never be able to talk to our dad again. Sorry, Denise. I hear his voice in my head frequently as he talks about some event in history or some concept in computer science. I could talk with Dad about things that most people would find tedious, and he would engage completely in philosophical or political discussions. Nancy, my wife, reminded me of a conversation we had about the advantages and disadvantages of meritocracies, which lasted from when we left our hotel in San Francisco to our arrival at our home in Phoenix, during which we were completely oblivious to everyone around us. He lived a full life, and his journey was more interesting and varied than most of us could hope for. We will miss him deeply, deeply.
At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son."
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early, on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large.
I particularly appreciated that. I'm largely fueled on coffee. He ran several activities for the members, including a quiz. That was in the room next to my office, and I always enjoyed listening in. He helped out at lunchtime, and of course he was always ready to chat with the members. And the members loved him. As we've heard, he had a keen interest in technology, and it was he who arranged for the installation of our video projector. But even when he wasn't actually at Ellery Hall, he was still on the case. He initiated the members' newsletter topic, writing and designing it on his computer at home. And of course, he attended countless mind-numbingly tedious and often frustrating meetings with local authority officers, local accessible transport organisations and the like. I ask you, who'd chair a small local charity? On top of this, he spent every Christmas day at Ellery Hall helping out at the Christmas Day lunch, which was and still is organised by local churches, including this one. But despite his ubiquitous presence, it seems he didn't think he was doing quite enough. So after a while, he became the charity's treasurer. Now, to be honest, he did demonstrate some disdain for such things as conventional spreadsheets and the like. He preferred instead to keep many of the income and expenditure forecasts safely locked away in his head. But when the time came to prepare the annual accounts for our auditors, the figures always came out to pretty much precisely what he said they would. Like I said, he was a clever man. Eventually, perhaps finally succumbing to pressure from you, Stella, he did agree to limit his Ellery time to a mere 4 days a week. 4 days a week, more than the rest of the trustees put together. In fact, he continued to do that right up until that awful stroke. Then he had little choice but to relinquish his trustee roles, but he remained a staunch and very active supporter of the charity. He continued to run his quiz and a new reminiscence group right up until the time a few years ago when it just became too difficult for him. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see Graham making encouraging gestures. I think so I'll wind up by saying again that Trevor made an enormous contribution to Ellery Hall. And in doing that, he made an enormous contribution to the lives of countless hundreds of older people for whom Ellery Hall is a real social lifeline. And for that, we at Ellery Hall shall always be grateful to him, and he'll retain an affectionate place in our memory for a long, long time. So, thanks, Trevor. To have known you and worked with you has been a privilege.
This, I hope, will be a brief postscript, because much of what I thought I might say has already been said. Over the past month, I've had the very real pleasure of spending time with Trevor, pushing him in his wheelchair, which seemed to get heavier and heavier week after week, often to Bushy Park, and ending up somewhere where a cup of coffee and a bite to eat could be found. Trevor could still put paid to a chocolate brownie in record time. We enjoyed those moments, reminiscing, pondering the future, arguing, talking trivia as well as deepening our faith, sharing our doubts, exploring the mystery, allowing ideas to evolve or simply blown away like the chaff. By the end of our conversations, we always reckoned that we had sorted the world out, only to find the following morning that it was still in a bit of a mess. His parents were Baptists with strong, simple faith. Trevor was deeply fond of his father, a bit scared of his mother. He came, as you've known, through Boys' Brigade and Christian Endeavour, and the latter being immensely influential in allowing him to talk about his faith with others. He accepted the way of Christ and was baptized at 14. His parents, particularly his mother, encouraged him to explore other Christian denominations, from Anglicans to Quakers. And as you've heard, he was very much taken with the Quakers' quiet, contemplative approach to the worship of God. In his youth, he must have been frighteningly fit. He talks about his time in national service, and you've already heard some of that. He volunteered for anything and everything. Cycling was an obsession. He was devoted to his bikes. We talked cycling, but whenever I started to boast about my modest achievements, he would say, "But did your bike have gears?" He would then repeat his stories of cycling from London to Birmingham in a day on a fixed-wheel bike. You can't even freewheel down the hills on those things. And he even seems to have managed somewhere near 150 miles in a day on the same machine. The phrase, "fit as a butcher's dog," doesn't come anywhere near to demonstrating his ability. Trevor was an avid reader. He read every book in the house and then the local library. He was widely read right up to the end. Curious, fascinated by every aspect of life. And what a memory he had, not dimmed even in his last months. He would modestly claim not to be a natural intellectual. That was rubbish, of course, but he was an extremely hard worker and a discipline which stood him in such good stead in every area of his life. He joined this in 1963 in every aspect of church life, teaching holiday clubs, homedeacon, treasurer, registrar. I've probably missed plenty of other things. In addition, Stella and he fostered a number of children who were in need of a stable home. In 1980, as you know, they went to Nepal with the Baptist Missionary Society. He as Central Service Director. For all the frontline missionaries, Trevor and Stella were their homemakers, enablers, encouragers. That was their forte. It is typical of the man that in his retirement, Trevor volunteered with Citizens Advice and, as you've already heard, devoted himself to Ellery Hall. Only yesterday I heard of Trevor's unstinting help with the Lynn Folds Wood Bowel Cancer campaign. There will be countless others of you who have cause to be grateful for a helping hand from Trevor. He was someone who could be relied upon. He drew out the best in others. He was an encourager with a capital E. He was honest. He was genuine. He was wise. It can be said of him, in words which have been used to describe his Saviour, he went about doing good.
Thank you, Colin.
To test just how much attention the attention-stealing design of the new Skoda Fabia actually steals, we left one parked on this ordinary road in West London. We wanted to see if its sharp crystalline shapes, bold lines and lower, wider profile would attract the desired level of attention. Will the 17-inch black alloy wheels stop passers-by in their tracks? Will the angular headlights attract the attention of other road users? Will a crowd gather to check out its fresh, sporty look? Well, not quite. But did the attention-stealing design distract you from noticing that the entire street has been changing right before your very eyes? Don't believe us? Have another look. Did you spot the van changing to a taxi? How about the scooter changing to a pair of bicycles? Or the lady holding a pig? Let alone the fact that the entire street is now completely different. Didn't think so.
Trevor was very logical, as we've heard. He liked things that were reasonable and had a keen grasp of history. Yet sometimes we're not as observant as we think we are. We miss the obvious, even though it's right in front of our eyes, as that awareness test demonstrated. When we're distracted or focus on something we think is important, we can so easily miss out on the reality that surrounds us. Our reading speaks of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, an inconvenient truth if it happened, a harmless myth or a deliberate act of deceit if it didn't. An old communist Russian dictionary describes Jesus as a mythical figure who never existed, except no historian would maintain that position today. The Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius and the Jewish historian Josephus all wrote about Jesus. Through the science of textual criticism, we establish the reliability of a text. No one would question the validity of Herodotus' histories or Caesar's Gallic wars or Livy's Roman history. And textual criticism maintains that the biblical testimony is far more outstanding than any of those great books I've just spoken about. If we were logical, reasonable, and with a keen grasp of history, we would have to conclude that Jesus' death and resurrection is at very worst an inconvenient truth. It's an inconvenient truth because he lived and taught and made claims about his life that either make him bad, mad, or God. The only option not left open to us was he was just a good man. You can't make outrageous claims about yourself and just be a good man. As we flick through the evidence, the prophecies that speak of him, his character, his teachings, his miracles, and supremely his resurrection, the evidence clearly suggests that he was neither mad nor bad. Left with one option, when everything else has been eliminated, we have to conclude he was God. It's the only logical and rational conclusion, but an inconvenient truth if you don't want to believe it. Trevor and Stella did pause, listen, and obey God's calling on their life that led them to Nepal. It was the first conversation I ever had with Trevor. Did you know we went to Nepal with the BMS? Was his opening gambit. There they experienced God and his wonderful and miraculous provision for them. It's easy to become distracted by the Skoda Fabias of this world with their 17-inch alloy wheels and angular headlights. Yet every time we hear the truth of the resurrection and stop to think of the life of someone whose God's hand has touched and shaped their life, choice. Are we going to ignore it as an inconvenient truth, or like Trevor and Stella, respond to it and see what adventure lies ahead. Funerals are wonderful things because you never quite know what's going to happen. And I said to Andrew last night, I don't think I've sung our closing hymn since I was knee-high to a grasshopper in the 70s. But we're going to have a joyful song to end with. I hope you know it. They don't sound too enthusiastic, Stella. But we're going to do it justice, even though you might not have sung it for 30 or 40 years. Can I invite you to stand? They did all right, Stella. Great, if you could grab your order of service, we've got a final blessing. We're going to, it's on the screen. Fantastic, thank you, Colin. On behalf of Stella, I want to thank all those that have contributed to the service, to those that have prepared the refreshments afterwards. Stella would like to invite you through to the hall. It's been great having you with us this afternoon. So we say together, and you're allowed to look at people and smile. I know it's church, but you are allowed to smile in church. And bless your neighbour as you say these words over one another. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, the rains fall soft upon your fields. Until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Amen.